What is going on, everybody? Welcome to a very special Extra Mile hosted by myself. I'm Matt. You can find me over at the PlayStation Drive with Ryan Turford as part of You, Me, and Capri. We're going to be talking all about Deathloop, and I am joined by Andrew from We the Nerdy. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend.
Pleasure to have me. For being here, I guess.
Well, I first off want to send a huge thank you to yourself and the crew over at We the Nerdy, and of course to Bethesda for providing us with review codes. So thank you, Bethesda. That's dope of you. Very kind. And of course for you, Andrew, thank you for signing us codes our way over at the PlayStation Drive.
No problem.
Awesome. So we're going to be getting in depth about Deathloop. We have both been spending time with it over the last few days. Before we get into the nitty gritty, if you're curious as to what Deathloop is, if you've somehow missed all 400 trailers that we've had for this game, basically it is Arcane's last, probably PS5 exclusive, probably one of the last Bethesda games we're going to see on a PlayStation platform. And I know we were talking a little bit before, Andrew, and I know you said you're already a bit of a fan of Arcane. Tell me a little bit about your feelings with the studio.
I love the Arcane Studios. I think that of the games they've developed as of right now, I think Prey is the weakest. I'm a huge fan of the Dishonored series. I love the combat. I love just the level structures of a lot of their games where you're not necessarily pinned down to a specific path. Especially with a lot of the Bethesda games that have come out in the last few years, there's always been more of a tunnel of things and kind of with Arcane, it's kind of like, no, like this is your playground. Like where you are right now, this is where you're going to kind of have fun. There's multiple ways of kind of pursuing things. And for me, like kind of going to a different area of Arcane where it's not necessarily, a super sci-fi thing that Prey was. And then you kind of have more of like I don't want to necessarily say medieval, but more of like that, I guess like
steampunkish almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's this kind of weird in between.
Yeah, it's like this weird, like, Deathloop is more of like this 70s, 60s, like action spy thriller movie, I guess. It kind of, that's like the vibe I get with like the music and kind of how the overtones are for it.
Yeah, it's like, for me, if you kind of took like a classic 007 movie and kind of mashed it with that Tom Cruise movie, what was it, Edge of Tomorrow? Was it Edge of Tomorrow? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like,
yeah,
you kind of fuse those things together and you get kind of what Deathloop is. So essentially, what you're going to be doing in the game, you're playing as Colt as you wake up without any of your memories, and you start reliving the same day over and over again as you try and take down the 7 visionaries to try and break the loop that you're stuck in. Andrew, before we get even further, let's talk a little bit just about how far we are in the game so everybody listening knows about where we're at. For myself, I've probably put about 10 to 12 hours into the game over the last few days, and I'm pretty sure I'm almost at the end. Not 100% sure, granted, because I'm not there yet, but that's roughly about where I'm at. What about yourself, Andrew? How much time have you spent with it?
I put about 4 hours into it so far. I've had a lot of time to kind of dig fully into it, but yeah, I just got through my first full day of the game.
Nice.
So yeah, that's where I'm sitting, and it's definitely a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm super, super impressed with it so far. What do you think of, let's start with the story. What do you think of the bits of story that you've seen so far? And obviously, we're going to try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible, just for everybody who's going to be waiting to dive into the game. But kind of overall impressions of what you have from the story so far. What do you think?
It's interesting. I like the way that you start out the game with Colt not having any memory of himself. Mm-hmm. And kind of like you literally start the game, where you're getting stabbed and you're dying. So you're already beginning that loop again. And kind of just getting like these little nuggets here and there and kind of having that third person or that kind of like spirit that's kind of like guiding you with the kind of the font everywhere. Mm-hmm. I definitely like that element, and you don't necessarily have to have like everything force fed to you. It's kind of more like, you're kind of finding things out as you go along, kind of like, Colt himself is trying to figure everything out again, even though he already, has a past. He's already done a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. I like that there's more of the, you're kind of following along with everybody as well.
Yeah, something that I really like about it is like the world feels very much like lived in. Like even with like you mentioned, Colt doesn't have any memory, but you can still, there's a lot around that kind of makes you understand what's happening and kind of gives you inklings. Like you said, the kind of writing that might appear on the wall felt very like Dark Souls-ish, where you're able to kind of read the past, players' little things as they pop up.
Yeah.
But like, obviously this is Colt talking to himself, but yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. Oh no. I even just like hearing like some of the dialogue from some of the other like NPCs that you're fighting, because some of them are just talking about like, being recruited and kind of like, oh man, this is like my 17th loop or something like that. You're kind of just hearing those little bits and pieces there. Kind of, it makes you chuckle, but you're also like, wait, like, are they cognizant of the loop or are they not cognizant of the loop? It's like I get that kind of weird conflict sometimes with some of them.
Yeah, and it's really really interestingly put together because the story, as you said, kind of they really don't like throw a lot at you at one time, and there's it's kind of up to you because obviously as you kind of have these conversations with Juliana, who's one of the main antagonists of the game, you kind of start to piece things together a little bit, but there's also a lot to be learned even in just the computer logs that you'll find and different kind of environmental cues that you can kind of pick up on. Oh, hold on, maybe this is what happened before, or maybe this is what's going to happen next. The game does a really good job of not just being like, here, this is a story, and like shoving it down your throat. It really
Yeah,
kind of builds naturally around the characters rather than it just being the characters being just kind of vehicle for the story. I feel like they go hand in hand really well.
definitely, and I agree with you the same way. And it's a lot of, and I like the fact that Juliana isn't, at least from the part I played up to, she's not like this. She's there, she's antagonizing you, but she's also not constantly in your face.
Yes.
And like she keeps. I like the fact that even in the beginning with Colt's like, we dated, didn't we? And
Yeah.
she's like, you don't know, but at the same time, it's like, I don't think there was that romance element there for me, at least.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's really interesting. I really like how they set up the two characters because like I expected Juliana to be much more of a ever-present threat, and she is.
Yeah.
She's very vocal. She's there with you every time you start a loop. You have a short conversation with her, and she'll kind of pop in here and there. But like I was a little worried that she was going to be there like every 5 minutes. You're going to have Juliana running and chasing after you,
Hmm.
and that's not the case. She's there very sparingly, but when she is there, just this ever sense of dread just kind of sets in, and you're like, oh my god, what am I going to do? I've been invaded by AI controlled Julianas and both player controlled Julianas throughout my time with the game, and as soon as she steps onto the map, it's just panic. I'm completely on edge the whole time. It reminded me a lot of like the Assassin's Creed multiplayer from years and years ago, where
Oh yeah.
because she has this ability where she can take the form of any one of the NPCs and then kind of just wander around and act like an NPC. So it's a kind of like this whole, oh my god, where is she? Is she around here? What's going on? And it's she's used really really well and not in your face all the time, which is what I was nervous about going into the game. And I'm very happy that's not the case.
Yeah, same. Because especially with how the trailers looked, it very much felt like she was going to constantly be there and be your stopgap every single time you're going through every single thing. And
Mm-hmm.
from my experience, I've only dealt with Juliana once so far, and even then, I was barreling it out of the way because I was like, nope, you stabbed me at first. I'm no, thank you. I don't want to deal with that again. I'm
Yeah,
out.
seriously, it's just this. It's so nerve wracking. I get so anxious as soon as she pops up, and I'm like, oh my god, okay, where is she gonna come from? What's going on? It's implemented really well because she also doesn't feel overpowered. Like you feel like you actually stand a really good chance fighting against her. Because
Yeah,
that was another thing that I was a little bit nervous about. Was like, was Juliana just gonna feel like this like overpowered antagonist? And it's not. Like you have, if you play smart and you understand what you're supposed to be doing, and you're not just like running around guns blazing all the time, you stand a really good chance against her. And it's the rewards for beating her are like when you finally do it, it's like, oh my god, yes, I did it, like accomplished. I don't need to do anything else to the game. Put the controller down, I'm done. But also like the rewards that you get from doing that are really great. So I'm really enjoying it. How do you feel about the gameplay so far? Because I mean, it is very classic arcane.
yeah, it
And
very much is.
how do you feel about the gameplay so far?
I love the gameplay. I love the fact that you, like I said, you have like that classic arcane feel, and kind of it gives you a lot of tools to succeed. So when you every time you start a loop, you start with that submachine gun pistol, but even still, you have a lot of these like the hack a jig, which I love the name of the hack a jig. That is
Yeah.
just like he's like, it's I hack a jig. I'm like, all right, cool, I love it. But there's that, but there's also just so many different ways to kind of play. So you can go kind of balls to the wall
Hmm.
and go complete chaos effect. But for me, I'm playing more stealthily, so I'm kind of trying to. And I love the fact that you can kind of go around and you're seeing like all these different areas and kind of just playing. I'm playing smarter, not kind of just going through and trying to kill everybody. Even though I just found in my last loop the pepper mill, the submachine, like the machine gun. So
Hmm.
I ended up triggering a whole thing in one of the laboratories and just started mowing people down because I wanted to see how it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, let's see how this actually goes. And it was kind of fun to see that compared to something like the nail gun that you get, and which I kind of find is a little OP in terms
Hmm.
of like distance and everything as of right now. But it's still like just like that kind of variety and kind of having in You also have like the rarities of items too, where things aren't necessarily, you always want to look at every item that drops because yes, it might be the same gun, but there might be
Mhm.
other attachments to it as well.
Exactly. Yeah, the guns can augment in different ways. Like for example, like one of the shotguns can have like a tighter spread, or you like again the same shotgun might be able to like double tap the trigger to fire off even faster. So like even the different guns, as you mentioned, like have a lot of differences to them. And same as you, I love, especially in arcade games, I love being the sneaky quiet one. I like to sneak around, and like I'm very much in Dishonored, or like if I got caught, I'd be like, all right, reload that safe, which isn't
Yep.
really an option here. Like you don't have that ability, which I actually really like and also fits the game perfectly fine. But sneaking around, the guns feel great. There are so many different abilities, and especially because how reserved um, the game is with how much you're able to equip at one time, also like kind of lets you try and figure out. So one of the main things that you get in the game are slabs. Whenever you take down a visionary, you get a slab, which is basically like just a different power. One of them that we've seen in the trailer is like the very Dishonored kind of warp teleport. uh, Even within the slabs there are multiple augments to change how they work, and you get that by kind of beating the enemies over and over again. So even within just this one singular power, there are also different ways that they augment. And again, you can't have everything equipped all the time. You have to be very careful about what you're using and when. So even within that, there are abilities that will let you be that, murderous tank if you just want to walk through the streets and destroy everything in front of you. If you want to be really sneaky, there are ones that kind of cater toward that as well. So I'm really impressed with how much customization there is in the game, because they do really let you play it however you want. There are consequences to both, but it really does open up a lot, um, in terms of how much you're able to kind of make Colt the kind of character you want to play.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because especially with like how it's been like the year of like the roguelikes, where we had like Returnal and we've had
Mm-hmm.
Hades kind of come to PlayStation as well. You don't necessarily get that kind of customization with those games. Namely, with Returnal, you kind of have more of a limited repertoire of stuff that you can use. Hades, you get a little more of that, but with Deathloop, I like the fact that you have that more of a granular customization level to it. So you can kind of make Colt how you want him to be. But then, again, once you die or the loop closes,
Mm-hmm.
you're back to square one again. So you have to figure everything out.
Yeah, and I really like how they did that, because like you mentioned, even in Returnal, I kind of very much got like I'm looking for these specific powers at this specific time, and that's all
Yep.
I'm going to use for the remainder of the run. Like Deathloop lets you play with it in a much different way, which I really appreciated. So the gameplay, so like I said, I think I'm towards the end of the game. I thought that I would get a little annoyed with the death loop mechanic, kind of being like, oh, I have to go explore this thing again. I have to go to do this, kind of retrace my steps in the same way. The game does a lot to kind of keep that very fresh and kind of keep each loop feeling very different. And especially because each day is separated into 4 different time slots. You have, your morning, noon, afternoon, and night, where only certain things will happen at certain times, and enemy placements will change during time of day and location. Everything changes depending on when and where you're doing it. And I think that's something that like I'm so Andrew, for myself, I'm not really huge on kind of retracing my steps over and over again just for the sake of doing so. So
Same.
again, that was something I was nervous about coming into Deathloop, and now it's kind of like similar to that Tom Cruise movie. The first couple times I was going through an area, I was kind of like, okay, where's everybody? And now it's kind of like, okay, I know my optimal path, I know where I'm going, but also the level can change quite a bit depending on when you go. So that all goes out the window at the same time. So it's like when you get into the groove, it's awesome, but it's also like, holy crap, okay, when is things actually happen? Where are these enemies from before?
Yeah, and I like that too because I was trying to find like shortcuts around kind of because they kind of give you that optimal path in the beginning, but you also look at it and it's like there are other ways. If there are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of paths around, so like even in the one I was going to one of the laboratories, I remember going through my last run creating some shortcuts for myself. So I'm like, okay, why wouldn't I just try to go through that way again? So I went through those shortcuts again, but I didn't encounter any real resistance the last time. But this time I had like 14 of the people. I guess I don't even know what they
Yeah.
call them. Um, Kind of walking around, and I was like, okay, this is now, this has become an immensely more challenging area for me than it was last time. So I had to kind of use my brain to figure out what way to get around. That's why I actually ended up using the pepper mill machine gun, just because I wanted to test it out too. But I ended up killing the first person. He had it. I'm like, okay, usually I don't want to do this, but in this specific scenario, I had the gun. I'm right next to a health replenish station. Let's rock.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many of those awesome little situations where you're kind of like, all right, I did this way, I did these things this way, and I know that they worked, but the game really does give you that kind of scratch of, why don't I try it a little bit differently this time to see if I can figure out a better way around it? Because there are a ton of different ways to handle each like specific situation, and especially as the game kind of continues to unravel and you start to see where things link together and how things like what is really the optimal path. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to figure out, right? How do I take
Hmm.
out these 7 people in a way that I'm going to be able to do this in one day? And like the way everything starts coming together and fitting together is just so well done. And like I have been pretty much binging this game for the last few days. I keep expecting to get sick of it, but I woke up this morning being like, if I do this time and maybe do this way instead of doing this way, and it's like it's sitting in my head for the last couple of days, Andrew. And it's like I don't know about
Yeah.
you, but it's just like I keep thinking about like, how can I do it differently?
I agree with you, and it was funny because I was talking a little bit on our stream last night over on our Twitch channel, and I was just like, I'm enjoying it, and I was like, I was playing Tales of Arise, and I kept sitting in the back of my head, I'm like, I kind of want to just play Deathloop right now. Like I've been loving Tales of Arise. That's a whole
Mm-hmm.
separate story, but for myself, it's also like, there, like you said, like there's so many different avenues, and kind of just like when you're sitting there and trying to think, okay, how can I plan my run, or what can I do better in that I kind of messed up last time. Like there is so much flexibility there that and coming from somebody who doesn't necessarily like a lot of the roguelikes, like I wasn't a big fan of Returnal after playing it. I
Mm-hmm.
liked Hades, but I wasn't the one screaming game of the year. This is the one for me that I like going back to
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like there's a lot more flexibility there, and there's also more of like, if I close out of the game, mid level or whatever, like mid loop, it's not stopping me from going back to that. It's not killing me or resetting all my stats,
Yeah.
which I absolutely love. And I also just love just the feel and the tone of the game, because when you're kind of jumping in, it kind of makes you feel like you're like this badass, you know, secret agent, and you got like your dossiers. You're trying to look at your what you're trying to do, try to check off your lists, and and then when you get to that added element, like you said, of like the day night cycle. And you have to go to a specific area at a specific time, and the level of difficulty for that area changes drastically from, okay, in the daytime, one area is, doesn't have like, any kind of security cameras or turrets. And then you
Mm-hmm.
go back down that route, and now all of a sudden there's two security cameras, there's a turret, and then they have, like a bunch of guards that are just walking around there too. And you're like, okay, where do I got to go now? So this is kind of like you have to kind of plan everything out. And I absolutely love that about the game.
Yeah, like I've had myself like taking notes on my phone, being like, okay, at this time and this area, this is what's going to happen. So I need to try and figure things out this way at this time. And I have like this, like almost like this, like page long of notes on my phone, just like trying to remember where things were happening when, so I can keep track of it to, figure out how I can get in and get out without either being seen or, without destroying myself all the way.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you touched on that as well, because like the vibe of the game is a lot more kind of jovial and bright than I was expecting, while also just being very crass. I kind of have that humor. Like they're swearing almost every 30 seconds, whether it's Colt or Juliana
Yep.
or any of the other characters. And like I find the writing to be very endearing. I find it very funny and very humorous and quite witty at times. And especially as like each of the 7 visionaries that you encounter feel very different. Like each one of their scenarios is completely different than the one before, and they're all written very different. So, what do you think about the writing so far?
I enjoy the writing a lot. I think that, at least from what I've encountered so far, it's been, like you said, it's been very witty. It's been very on point. I haven't felt like my eyes have been rolling, like hearing like these stupid kind of
Yeah.
like, oh my god, yeah, okay, guys, we get it. Like, and I'm actually sitting sometimes listening to some of these uh guards just kind of walk around talking, because like I'm enjoying what they're actually talking about, because it seems like they're having more of a natural conversation than in some other games, even like Dishonor, where like those kind of games, they didn't necessarily have genuine conversations, because you had a bunch of those old guards kind of just walking around doing nothing. These guys
Mhm.
are actually having legit conversations, talking about the loop, talking about one of the crazy scientists that you're dealing with, or what they ate for breakfast that morning. And you're kind of just sitting there being like, I could kill you in a minute, but let's see, let's finish your conversation first before I slit your throat. We'll go with that.
Exactly. And like there's a lot of those times where, like you said, just like sitting around and listening to the conversations could like lead to something either funny or ridiculous. There is one conversation, and like you'll like the game will keep notes also for you as you're doing these, and a lot of these conversations will pop up, and it's kind of up to you to figure out, okay, which one of these are actually valuable pieces of information and which of these are not. And sometimes you have to go figure it out. There was one
Hmm.
part in one level where they're having a conversation about these like They're trying to do the science experiment, and you kind of follow it down. Very light spoilers for a very non-important part of the game, but you go and you find two of the enemies. One of them has a gas tank over his head, and the other guy's like, shoot it, let's see what's gonna happen. So it's like, if there's nothing important that comes from that, but it's also, you can just sit there and watch them blow themselves up, and it's one of those moments where it's just, as you're just kind of wandering around and looking, it's so funny how they put together everything, and it kind of be like, everything feels important until you go and figure it out, and it's like, okay, is this something that's worth valuable and worth my time, or is it just a joke, or is it just something that's really not going to help me at all? And finding that balance it really nails that feel that entire time.
For sure, like absolutely. Like, even there was one time where like two of the guys were doing like axe duty or whatever, I think it was, like they were mining duty in one of the areas, and they were like, I don't know what like straw I pulled to get out of this, and they were just like complaining with each other. He goes, listen, we got like 2 more hours left and the loop starts again, so just calm down. And, but just like, hearing that kind of stuff, you're like, wait, what? Like, you guys were like complaining about your work. Like, you don't normally expect something of that caliber, and just kind of a subtle writing element. Like, maybe if it's like a main protagonist or something like that. But I was like, this is actually kind of fascinating to kind of just sit there and be like, okay, complain about your job a little bit more. And I'm gonna pretend like I'm your boss, sitting behind you, being like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just kind of sitting there like, what else are you going to talk about? And sometimes you get valuable information from these people, and sometimes it's absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
One of the last things that I want to touch on before we kind of get to overall thoughts, what are your feelings on the music and the graphics so far? Because I feel like those kind of go hand in hand, and I feel like they're both done in very interesting ways.
Yeah, the music I'm loving. Like I said, it's kind of more like that same kind of like spy thriller, Bond, 60s, 70s era music, which I'm really digging. Graphics wise, I'm liking it. I mean, it's not necessarily like a system seller for the PS5. It's not something that's going to be like, you're gonna look at this 5 years from now and go, holy cow, I don't know how they made this. But I love the architecture that they put in the game. Everything looks bright, vibrant. It pops. I think for me, there was a couple times I had some graphical pop-ins, like some drawing. I don't know if you had the same problem, but for myself, that's kind of where I'm. The graphics are great. I like the architecture. Yeah, like the music's great.
Yeah, I agree. I really am enjoying the music, and I find that like each area especially has, like, again, depending on time of day, depending on where you're at, the music changes quite drastically as well. And like there are certain moments that even when Juliana comes in, and you're kind of like, oh crap, things will change, and the music is done incredibly well. I agree with you on the graphics. I think they're fine. I think they look better playing than they looked in trailers, because every time I saw the trailers, like, yeah, they look okay. I think they look good. But same as you, I've had some graphical issues. I've had a bunch of frame drops, especially when Juliana was invading at certain times and it was another player. The game would almost like grind to a halt for like 3 to 5 seconds as it kind of figured things out. And there were other points, like you said, I had some pop in, I had some weird graphical hitches. There wasn't a lot, but yeah, like there were moments where the frames dropped pretty significantly. And there were some moments where, yeah, there was some pop in or some weird graphical hitches, or like a character would get stuck in a wall or something like that. So it's not perfect. Like, it definitely has some things that it needs to iron out, but I think overall it looks pretty good. Um, I'm not sure about you, but I've also actually had some other technical issues where I had to flat out force quit the game a couple times because it froze. And like you mentioned earlier, it does a really good job of checkpointing and saving. The biggest problem is that it won't do that very well when you're actually, like, if you enter an area at noon. I got to the very end of that area, I accomplished all of my objectives, and then all of a sudden, like, you'll have things pop up where it's like, okay, click on this if you want to see more information. And I did that, and the entire screen just kind of went blank. I couldn't click anything. I couldn't do anything. And when I force quit the game and reloaded, it started me again at the beginning of the noon time cycle. So like there are certain things like that need to be ironed out, and that's happened twice over the course of about like the 10 to 12 hours I've spent with the game. So not a ton, but it's frustrating when you're like, oh yes, I did everything the right way, and then you have to redo it all because of a glitch or a bug. It's a little bit frustrating. I don't know. Have you run into any like big technical issues?
Technical issues so far, no. Thankfully, I haven't. I did notice a couple of times, I guess, with my DualShock or my DualSense now, DualSense. It felt weird, kind of like when Cole was walking around. You get that sometimes where you can feel like he's walking around, but sometimes I guess maybe I wasn't noticing, but it also felt like the steps weren't necessarily hitting the same way, like as he was actually walking around. I guess that was just maybe it was just a me thing, but it just felt like there's a lot of time where he'd be like walking around, and I'm like I wasn't feeling it on my DualSense at all.
Yeah, I think there are a couple, bugs that need to be ironed out, and hopefully that'll be taken care of pretty closely to the launch. Because again, like there wasn't a ton, and it's not as broken as some games have been in the past. But just be
Hmm.
aware that there were some technical issues through my time with the game so far. And Andrew's also come up across a few. Just be aware that they're there. Thankfully, the game does a pretty good job at checkpointing and making sure it's saving for you. But there are moments where you might lose some progress. It's never been anything egregious. Like I think the most I lost was probably about 20 minutes. So it's not like I'm like 2 hours down the drain. But just be aware that has happened. The last thing that I want to touch on, and I'm not sure if you had much time with it, is the multiplayer at all. Have you had much of an opportunity?
Not much of an opportunity with that, unfortunately. I really, it's been more of just playing the single player side of it.
Yeah, the multiplayer actually takes quite a while for it to actually unlock. Like the beginning tutorial section is quite lengthy, and then after kind of that unlocks, the game opens up a lot. I have played on both Colt side and Juliana side. Colt side, like I said, the sense of dread that hits when another player invades your game is like, again, it's a feeling that I haven't had since like Assassin's Creed or Dark Souls. It's really cool being like, okay, I have to try and find her before she finds me. It can be a little bit drawn out playing on Juliana's side just because the levels are quite big, and playing as Juliana, they give you absolutely no indication as to where Colt is, which is part of the fun because it almost becomes like this hide and seek. So there could be
Hmm.
points where you're kind of like, I would spend like 5 to 10 minutes with nothing happening just because I'd be wandering around the level looking for Colt, and the levels are quite large. But once you kind of find each other, and then it's setting up your traps, making sure everything's set up properly. I think this is the closest thing to that Assassin's Creed 2 era multiplayer, which I really, really enjoyed. Um, I think this is the closest thing that I've played since then to kind of give you that same vibe. On Juliana's side, as you kind of invade more games and as either succeed for a certain amount of time or you get a certain amount of kills, you'll get upgrades for her in that way. So you can actually make your character better and better. I'm curious as to how they handle matchmaking as to in terms of like where you're at as Colt in the story versus how powerful Juliana is. I'm really not sure how that's handled, but I think that could be a potential issue. Unless they're
Yeah.
kind of measuring it somehow. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you on that, because I also think it's just kind of odd that, from a start, you have to go through the break the loop area of Colt and kind of go through that beginning story, like you said, because I think that there will be some people out there that are going to want to be the spoiler of sorts just to start the game.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you kind of have to put a little bit more time into it. Granted, it's showing you more of the fundamentals of the game, but it's still probably frustrating for somebody who wants to maybe play with their friends, or day one is like, okay, we have this group setting set up. We're gonna each take turns doing whatever, and you
Mm-hmm.
can't even do that as of right now because you have to spend a significant amount of time to get past that first day to then kind of move on and become and do that kind of online environment.
Yeah, it does take about 2 to 3 hours, I'd say, at least, like depending on how fast you play and depending on how much you're exploring. It does take a bit of time for the multiplayer to unlock. Granted, the multiplayer is done really well, like I said, aside of some slight technical issues on Colt's side, as sometimes, like I said, with Juliana loading in, the game would kind of really, slow down quite significantly. The multiplayer works pretty seamlessly. She cannot invade at all parts of all days. You have to be at a very specific time and place for her to be able to. But even now, like matchmaking, I've never waited more than a couple seconds. And playing Juliana side really feels like a much different game than playing Colts. So both sides of the game seem to be are really, really enjoyable, and there's a lot of difference there depending on what you're looking for. Um, Andrew, to close us out, can you give me some of your overall thoughts of the game? What do you think of Deathloop?
I'm really enjoying it. Honestly, this game took me by surprise just because when I first got the codes, I be quite honest, I wasn't really anticipating anything with it. But after playing it and kind of getting some time with it, I absolutely have fallen in love with the game. It's gonna be a game I think that's gonna be in my library for a long time. Just kind of playing and kind of going to see, the routes and kind of just being able to kind of explore more Cole and Juliana stories and kind of making sure that you know, because for me, I'm not a like I said, I'm not a big roguelike person, but this has probably been the most accessible and fun one that I played in a long time.
Yeah, I agree, especially because like they give you multiple, deaths before you get reset completely and et cetera, et cetera. They handle that a lot really well. I agree with you. I think the game is fantastic. I similarly to you, I think as we were kind of going into it, I think just because it's been a year of every major PlayStation event, we've seen a trailer for it, and especially after the showcase getting another trailer for it, I was just feeling a little worn out on the game before it even came out just because of
Yep.
how much exposure we've had to it. the first hour of the game completely, like, I forgot all of that. Playing Colt feels fantastic. Playing Juliana is a lot of fun. The story and the kind of twists and turns that it takes you on are fantastic. The visionaries are great. Technical issues aside, I think it's a really, really easy recommendation for me. And similarly to you, even after once I do finish the main game, it's one that I'm definitely going to come back to over and over again, because playing as Juliana is just, there's a lot there that you can do, and especially like, oh, friend, you just picked it up even a month after launch. Once you get to a certain point in the story, okay, let me re-download it, or let me pick it back up and mess around with you as Juliana. It gives you a lot of those opportunities, and I think it's really awesome. I'm really
Yeah.
enjoying it. Before we close out, can you hit us with your plugs, Andrew? If people wanted to find more about you, where can they do that?
Absolutely. You can find me over at Twitch at twitch.tv/we the nerdy. It's we underscore the underscore nerdy. You can find me over pretty much on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook, all at the same handles at we the nerdy. We have a website, wethenerdy.com. Content is coming out weekly right now. We have a bunch of reviews set up. We have a thing that I'm working on right now for if you have your child and you bought them their first gaming PC, what are the best accessories to get for them right now at a budget price. So that series is going on right now, so be sure to check it out.
That's awesome. That's so cool. So please go check that out. Andrew is making fantastic content, so you make sure you go support. As for myself, I am here at Yumi and Capri, co-hosting the PlayStation Drive with Mr. Ryan Turford. You can find the YouTube at youtube.com/Yumi and Capri, and I'll make sure all the rest of the links are below. If you want to see more of myself personally, I'm over at Twitter at burnout_Matt, and I help run Burnout Brighter, where we make a channel all about reviews, mental health, video games, and a whole bunch of other stuff. You can find us at youtube.com/burnoutbrighter. Andrew, thank you once again so much for joining me on this conversation. I hope you had a good time. It was so much fun talking about Deathloop with you.
Yep, I had a blast. We should do this again sometime.
Yes, we should. And once again, massive thank you to Bethesda for sending us the codes. We appreciate it very, very much. Everyone, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Keep it locked. And, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Peace out.